You wake up one day and realize you've been living a life that fits, but doesn't feel like your own. The clothes you wear, the words you speak, even the way you laugh, it all matches a version of you that the world approves of. But deep down, you know it's not real. You've mastered the art of shape-shifting. You say what people want to hear. You do what's expected. You stay quiet when your soul wants to scream. You succeed, perhaps even impressively, but there's a quiet hollowness under it all. A subtle ache that follows you into every room. No one sees it. You barely allow yourself to. But there are moments, brief and unexplainable, when something in you rebels. A song, a conversation, a sudden silence hits you like a flash of lightning. And for a moment you feel like yourself. Then it's gone, like a dream you can't quite hold on to. And the question hits, who are you beneath everything you were taught to be? You were not born to live on autopilot. You were not created to be just a name in a database, a role in a family, a placeholder in someone else's script. But the system is efficient. It shapes you early. Approval becomes your drug. Validation becomes your currency. Survival becomes your compass. And before you even have the language to understand it, you've traded authenticity for belonging. So you build a version of you that works, polished, predictable, palatable. You wear it long enough, and even you begin to forget it's a mask. But here's the paradox that haunts you. You can succeed by becoming who you're not, and still feel like a failure, because somewhere in you, the real you, the original, undiluted self, is screaming to be remembered. What if life hasn't truly begun yet? Not because of time or age or circumstance, but because you haven't yet met the person you were meant to be. Not the one others named, not the one trauma shaped, not the one fear kept quiet, but the one beneath the strips, behind the shame, beyond the performance. There's a reason you feel so deeply when something resonates. There's a reason some moments make you feel like you're finally alive. That's the self trying to break through. That's the soul knocking on the walls you built to protect it. The most terrifying and liberating truth you'll ever face is this: the life you're living might be a reflection of your wounds, not your will. And so the real question isn't what should I do with my life? The real question is more dangerous. Who am I when no one is watching? Until you answer that, everything else, every goal, every dream, every connection is a house built on sand. So ask it, not gently, not passively. Ask it like your life depends on it, because it does. You didn't choose the mask, at least not at first. It was handed to you in pieces, by a parent who only approved of you when you were obedient, by a culture that prized perfection over truth, by systems that demanded productivity but never presence. You didn't put it on to lie. You put it on to survive. Here's the quiet tragedy most people never name. You learn to be someone before you learn to be yourself. Psychologists call it false self syndrome. Philosophers call it existential inauthenticity. Jung called it persona, the social face we wear to function in a world that punishes too much truth. And you may not have the words, but you felt the cost. Because when the false self becomes your only self, life turns into performance. Your friendships become roles. Your relationships become negotiations. Your success becomes an illusion that requires constant maintenance. And your identity, a memory, half-formed and hidden beneath all the ways you've adapted. From early childhood, we're conditioned. Smile when you're hurting. Don't cry too loud. Don't be weird. Be nice. Be agreeable. Be whatever they need you to be. You start learning that who you are isn't always welcomed, but who you pretend to be is praised. And so, out of a deep biological and psychological need to be accepted, you abandon yourself. Not all at once, but slowly, subtly, strategically. You become a chameleon, emotionally intelligent, socially adept, outwardly fine. But internally, you feel fragmented, disconnected from your gut, unclear about your desires, unsure if your life reflects your will or just your conditioning. The most dangerous part, you get good at it. So good, in fact, that you forget you're even performing. And this is where it gets deeper. Because the world doesn't just reward the false self, it demands it. Job interviews don't ask for your authenticity. They ask for your polish. Social media doesn't care about your truth. It cares about your image. Relationships often aren't built on truth, but on reciprocal unspoken agreements. I'll pretend to be who you need me to be if you do the same. And so the mask hardens. But here's the cost, hidden in plain sight. Every time you silence a part of yourself to keep the peace, every time you agree when you want to say no, every time you stay quiet because speaking would mean being misunderstood, you abandon a piece of your soul. And abandonment, especially self-abandonment, accumulates like emotional debt. Eventually, it comes to collect, maybe in the form of burnout, maybe in a sudden existential crisis, maybe in quiet resentment or relationships that no longer feel real. Or maybe you just wake up one morning, unable to recognize your own reflection, not in the mirror, but in your thoughts. Who decided what you love? Who told you who you should be? What if your dreams were simply inherited expectations? What if the life you've been living is someone else's idea of success? Wearing your name? These are dangerous questions, but they are necessary ones. Philosophers like Kierkegaard wrote of despair as not being conscious of being oneself. It's not failure that crushes the soul. It's disconnection from the truth of who you are. It's being surrounded by people who know your name, but not your heart. It's achieving goals that looked good on paper, but felt empty in your hands. And the deepest irony, this entire act of self-betrayal came from a good place, from love, from fear, from a desperate hunger to belong. But you weren't made to perform your way into love. You were made to be loved as you are. The problem is not that you lost yourself. The problem is that no one ever taught you how to find yourself in the first place. You were given rules, roles, and rewards. You were trained to conform, comply, and succeed. But no one handed you a mirror and said, "This is your soul. Protect it, honor it, listen to it, even when the world tells you to silence it." Until you do that, you may live a life that looks beautiful from the outside, but feels like quiet devastation on the inside. And so, again, the question echoes, who are you when no one is left to please? You've seen the mask. You've felt its weight. Now the real work begins. Looking underneath it, you think you've gotten away with it. You smile. You function. You keep your schedule full. You accomplish enough to feel useful. Say just enough to avoid suspicion. And no one questions you because, how could they? You've become everything they wanted. But behind that mask is a quiet erosion. And the decay isn't obvious, not at first. It shows up in subtler ways. You struggle to answer when someone asks what you truly want. You pause before speaking, wondering if your opinion is acceptable. You laugh at things that don't amuse you. You say you're tired when what you really mean is "I feel invisible." You become emotionally fluent in the language of others, yet illiterate in your own. And while you may not feel the cost all at once, it compounds. You stop trusting your instincts. You lose touch with what excites you. You forget what it means to feel fully alive. You might still go out, still talk, still function, but something essential is missing. You live in grayscale. You experience people like reflections in a mirror, close, familiar, but never fully touched. And slowly, a terrible belief takes root in your subconscious. Maybe there is no real me worth finding. That's the deepest wound. Not rejection, not abandonment, but self-erasure. The kind that happens not from one moment of trauma, but from thousands of tiny silences. From all the times you swallowed the truth, twisted your voice to fit the room, convinced yourself that what you feel is too much, too messy, too inconvenient. And here's the part no one warns you about. When you live as a false self long enough, you start attracting people who only want that version of you. They don't want your truth, they want your compliance. They don't want your wholeness, they want your usefulness. So even when you try to be more honest, more raw, more real, they resist, or leave, or punish you with distance. You wonder why your relationships feel hollow, why intimacy feels impossible, why no one ever gets you. But how can they? They've never met the real you. And so, the loneliest feeling in the world isn't being alone. It's being surrounded by people while hiding who you truly are. And when this goes on long enough, it doesn't just damage your relationships, it begins to affect your body. Your nervous system becomes wired for performance. Your shoulders stay tense even at rest. You have difficulty sleeping, focusing, or feeling joy without guilt. Because when you're not living in alignment, your entire being is in quiet protest. You may find yourself self-sabotaging, breaking things that no longer serve you, but not knowing why, or falling into patterns that feel self-destructive, relationships that drain you, jobs that numb you, habits that dull the ache. It's not because you're broken, it's because the soul will not be silenced forever, even if it has to shut through symptoms, burnout, or breakdown. Eventually, your inner self starts to scream, not in words, but in the language of dysfunction. It's the psyche's way of saying, I can't live like this anymore. And in those moments of confusion, of crisis, of emotional collapse, you're given a terrifying gift, the chance to finally choose yourself. Not the mask, not the role, not the version that makes everyone else comfortable, but you, the one who was never truly lost, just buried. So no, the consequences of false living aren't always loud. They are slow, subtle, spectral, but they are real, and they leave a mark. You begin to mistrust love because you've only known love that required you to shrink. You begin to fear truth because you've been punished for revealing it. You begin to envy people who seem at peace, not because they have more, but because they aren't hiding. And somewhere deep in you, a whisper grows louder. There must be more than this. And there is, but not until the rebellion begins. It doesn't begin with fireworks. There's no grand epiphany, no cinematic escape from the false self. The rebellion begins in silence. It starts the moment you stop running from the ache, when you stop numbing it with busyness, when you stop dismissing your discomfort as weakness, when you stop mistaking performance for purpose. It starts with a whisper, I want my life back. And it's not dramatic at first. It's gentle, almost unnoticeable. You say no to something you would have said yes to. You pause before agreeing just to keep the peace. You let yourself feel anger without immediately turning it into guilt. And the mask so carefully crafted, so loyally worn, begins to crack. But here's the truth no one tells you. Reclaiming yourself is messy, because the false self was orderly, predictable, controlled. The real you, wild, emotional, unedited, honest, and for a while, it feels like regression. You may cry more, you may get angry, you may grieve the years you spent performing. But that's not failure, that's healing. You're thawing out the frozen parts of you, the ones that had to shut down to keep you safe, the ones that learned it was dangerous to be real. And like any thaw, it starts with pain. Psychologically, this is individuation, a term Carl Jung used to describe the process of becoming whole. It requires confrontation with your shadows. It demands that you face the parts of you you've exiled, the parts that were too much, too sensitive, too honest, too bold. You were never too much. You were just surrounded by people who were too uncomfortable to hold you. So you begin to reclaim. You start small. You journal not to perform wisdom, but to witness your truth. You reflect not to fix yourself, but to remember who you were before the world convinced you otherwise. You learn the sound of your intuition, not the fear that imitates it, but the voice underneath, calm, grounded, knowing. And slowly, you become more honest in your relationships, not brutally, but authentically. You stop apologizing for your needs. You stop editing your desires. You stop contorting yourself into a shape that's easy to love. And yes, this part is painful, because when you begin to show up as your whole self, some people will leave, not because you're wrong, but because they were only ever in love with the mask. This is where courage is required, to let them go, to let the false life unravel, to trust that what remains, what rises from the ashes, is real. It's the kind of courage that feels like loneliness at first, but in time you realize you were never truly connected to them. just compliant. You were never fully loved, just accepted under conditions. And what replaces that false connection is something sacred. Real relationships, built on truth, not performance. Purpose, rooted in passion, not expectation. Peace, not the fragile peace of appeasement, but the deep, unshakable peace of authenticity. But be warned, reclaiming yourself isn't a one-time event. It's a daily act of rebellion. Every time you speak your truth, you rebel. Every time you honor your needs, you rebel. Every time you sit with your pain instead of escaping it, you break the cycle. This is the revolution, not against others, but against the system inside you that said, you must become smaller to be loved. You do not need to be more likable. You do not need to be easier. You do not need to be less emotional, less opinionated, less intense, less you. You need to be home within yourself. And home is not found. It is built, moment by moment, truth by truth, choice by choice. This is your rebellion, not loud, but unstoppable, because the world doesn't need another version of someone else. It needs you, unmasked, unedited, undeniably alive. Some point, it stops being about healing. It stops being about fixing what's broken or recovering what was lost. You wake up one morning not with thunder, not with tears, but with stillness, a clarity that doesn't shout, a knowing that no longer needs validation. You realize you were never broken. You were buried under other people's expectations, under years of approval seeking, under a culture that taught you to fear your own voice. And now you remember it. You remember you, not the version others demanded, not the one you carefully constructed to survive, but the one you were born with, the wild, unfiltered, sacred self that existed long before the world tried to make you forget. This is the final truth. You are not a problem to solve. You are a presence to embody. The journey was never about self-improvement. It was about self-return. All the burnout, all the emotional exhaustion, all the empty relationships and haunting questions, they weren't signs that something was wrong with you. They were messages, signals from the soul, screams from the self, buried but never dead. Every breakdown, every sleepless night, every existential ache, it was all part of the path, not away from yourself, but toward yourself. And the peace you now begin to taste, it's not the peace of comfort. It's not the numbness of having no needs. It's the deep, earned peace of no longer betraying your essence. The peace of finally coming home. When you live like this, unmasked, awake, aligned, something radical happens. Your presence begins to change the room. Not because you're louder, but because you're whole. And wholeness is magnetic. Wholeness is revolutionary. You'll start to notice something almost mystical. People open up around you. Truth finds you. The right people stay. The wrong ones fall away, not through conflict, but through clarity and love. It begins to feel different. It's no longer about being needed or proving your worth or being chosen. It's about being met, soul to soul. No performance, no pretense, just truth and success. It stops being about status or scale or applause. It becomes about integrity, about building a life that reflects your inner world, not one that hides it. Because once you find yourself, everything else must realign. You don't chase alignment, you become alignment. And the life that fits that version of you begins to form around it. But here's the sacred paradox. Finding yourself doesn't mean becoming something new. It means remembering what was always there. You weren't born confused. You were born knowing. It's the forgetting that created the suffering. And now, it's the remembering that heals it. You realize you don't have to earn your right to be here. You don't have to justify your dreams. You don't have to be anyone else. You just have to be, fully, freely, fiercely. This is what it means to live unburdened, to show up in rooms without shrinking, to speak without trembling, to walk into your own life without apology. It doesn't mean you won't feel pain again. It means pain will no longer define you. It doesn't mean you'll never doubt again. It means doubt will never derail you, because now you know who you are, not in a surface level, social media way, but in a soul-deep, storm-tested, bone level way. You are not your trauma. You are not your past. You are not the roles you had to play. You are the one who survived it all. You are the witness, the architect, the flame. And real life doesn't begin when the world gives you permission. It begins when you give yourself back to yourself. No more pretending, no more shrinking, no more asking for permission to exist. This is it, your life, your voice, your truth, not someday, now.